Or sponsors.
Good morning, I'm Raquel the Bell on the one and only WWNN 1470. Today in the studio we have Tracy from We Are the People. You can join her every Monday night from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on her website, wearethepeople.tv. Tracy tackles the student loan dilemma and offers viable options. And now, here's Tracy.
Good evening and welcome to We Are the People, Students for Liberty. This is Jeff Van Treese filling in for Tracy this evening. I have a very special guest in studio this evening. Her name's Mariah Williams. She is an activist. She's currently pursuing her master's degree in what is it in? It's in
liberal arts.
Liberal arts with a focus on public policy, among other things. And we're going to be talking this evening about some of the recent development in the news, and we'll be sharing our thoughts on that. Definitely want to get to the benefit concert, which will be held at Churchill's, 5501 Northeast 2nd Avenue in Miami on December 17th at 8 p.m. And this will be a great event that will benefit the Student Services Society, which is a nonprofit organization that seeks to help out students that have student debt issues. Definitely come. There'll be some great bands there, and hopefully have a great evening on the 17th of December. So, Mariah, let's get right into it. We've had a pretty busy news week, just starting out with what happened today in Paris, just south of Paris. They have found what appears to be a suicide vest that they're suspecting might have come from the terrorists that escaped Salah Abdel Salam. And, they've been talking on the news about this issue. He was a French national. He didn't come from Syria. A lot of the other terrorists that were both at the theater and where the bombs went off actually were Europeans. They were not people that came in from the Middle East, but they were from Europe and became radicalized there. And now that's brought in some discussions about what could happen here in the U.S. This is not a traditional war that we're fighting, and it brings up some interesting questions that have not really, I'd like to see discussed more in the public sphere, certainly among the politicians running for president, about the idea that the concept that you can't kill an idea, you can't kill an ideology, and we're seeing that over there. If he does make it into Syria, it's going to be a serious blow, at least symbolically, to law enforcement and intelligence that they couldn't get him before he left. What are your thoughts on all of this chaos that's going on over there?
Have a lot of thoughts. I'll start with the political candidate, the candidates running for office.
Yes.
I think that's an important aspect to, especially millennials like myself, because we have to vote for these candidates, and they're going to carry on these complications when President Barack Obama leaves the office, the next person in office.
And they're not actually addressing the issue, and what they're saying, a lot of it's nonsense. I mean, there's some of the, especially the people on the GOP, are talking about how the terrorists, they hate us for our freedom, which just everybody that really knows anything about it knows that is just a nonsensical propagandistic answer. That's not why these attacks are taking place. There's many reasons, but mainly it's because we're there. When they interview these jihadists, it's because we're there. It's because we have military bases, and it has a lot to do with Israel, of course. Those are the motivations. It's of course, that then when you bring that up, they get accused of blaming the U.S., but that is what's motivating these attacks, and what will motivate future people to go join the jihadists. And if our politicians are so dishonest that they're going to come up and say that it's that from halfway around the world they don't like that we're free over here, that's just a real disservice that they're doing to everyone.
Yeah, so we have on one end the Republican Party, and many candidates, specifically Donald Trump. We have all seen him in the news, how he's reacted to many of the future policies that Congress and members of the House are trying to possibly consider for Syrian refugees. how he has responded to that situation, and he's come out and he said, "Hey, we don't need them here." So you see him having this sense of pride within himself, but he's speaking for many people in our nation, sadly, who run on the adrenaline of fear. So they're saying, even Governor Rick Scott of Florida, we don't want Syrian refugees here. We don't want them here because they could be terrorists. Now we can look at years ago, or before I was even thought about or born, the same thing happened with Jewish individuals. Or
When they were immigrating from Europe, and then they sent them
correct.
back, and then they were eventually killed by the Nazis.
Yes. So all because we didn't want to let them in because they could be spies. So you see this strong correlation, which I think many citizens should pay attention to. We should trust that our government has put in place agencies, and we have agents, and we have a great national security system. We should trust in our government. And when he's talking and he's saying these things, he's in a sense kind of telling Americans, hey, the President Obama doesn't know what he's doing, the FBI doesn't know what they're doing, the CIA doesn't know what they're doing, the NSA doesn't know what they're doing. We are going to tell them that we don't want these people in, right?
Well, it's an interesting discussion to have because, perhaps the United States is not the ideal place for them to be, but if you're trying to solve the problem of Syrian refugees, the number one priority is to get them out of harm's way. That's the
Correct.
first thing that has to be done. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to come here. There are surrounding Arab countries that are totally unwilling to accept them. That's why a lot of the refugees have gone into Europe, and that there's a certain assimilation that's much more difficult. It'd be much easier if they were to go to, for example, a neighboring country like Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Oman or somewhere like that, as opposed to going to Dusseldorf or or Brussels or somewhere. And of course, coming here might be difficult. But there are certain things that the U.S. could do to put pressure on these other these nation states to accept the refugees, because they're just, it sort of goes back to a pattern that we've seen of our allies in the Middle East just being not all that useful at solving this problem that we have. Saudi Arabia's actions have not only been unproductive, they've actually been counterproductive. It's one of the most ideologically extreme nations in the world. We always hear about Iran being so bad.
North Korea.
And North Korea. Well, Iran is actually a mortal enemy. They're Shia. They're a mortal enemy of ISIL, and they're probably the main bulwark right now that's stopping the spread of ISIS is actually the Iran-backed Shia militias, and the United States is not coordinating with them at all, and they're not actually even recognizing them as a partner in this. The Shias were fighting with the U.S. Ground troops back when we first invaded Iraq, when you had the sectarian violence, but now you're seeing the Shia actually going against ISIL, which you would think is our common enemy. So there's a lot of common enemies with ISIS, and you would have to imagine that if you really do support the troops and you want to see, if you say the last thing you'd ever want to see is more U.S. troops coming back maimed or killed, then you would want to do anything in your power to bring outside forces in to help. That goes for both the refugees as well as putting people on the ground to fight this enemy. And there's no discussion of that in the public discourse or in the debate, and that's really unfortunate.
I think it's quite difficult and, very complex, because if you look at it from a humanitarian standpoint, humanitarian agencies try to be apolitical. We as the U.S., we have our interests. So we are a nation state which we want our interests to be met, but we also have to be very cautious in the way and very strategic in the way that we do things.
When you say our interests to be met, that's an interesting term, because often when we talk about our interests, we're talking about the interests of Wall Street, the people that are backing our politicians. Unfortunately, the interests of the American people is often overlooked or has no real say in the matter. And I think that gets to the heart of the problem. It would appear that if we want to have peace over there and we don't want to have threats, that we would be working towards that, as opposed to what always the interests that always have to be met first, which is the interests of the oil companies and Wall Street. And that's that's why we've been there. I mean, as I've said on many occasions, would we have invaded Iraq if their main exports were pickles and lettuce? And I think that you'd have to be an imbecile to think that, quite frankly. And it's a question of whether the U.S. is really interested in the interests of the people here, maintaining peace in the world, or are there other interests that have to be met first?
I think they're both. I think domestically and abroad, there are interests that have to be met. But you raise a very great point. Who is making these rules? Who are we fighting for? What is the war really about? Are we making peace, or are we causing chaos? And I would even argue to say who really is who are our allies. We have the United States of America has to be very careful moving forward in our foreign policy, because globalization theory, one of the globalization theories states that as you're becoming more interconnected, more individuals who are non-Western, nation states that are non-Western, are collaborating more. And for them, there is a strong hate against the United States. So I think for what the United States was trying to do was not put their hands too publicly into the Syrian war and issues up front. It doesn't mean they're not involved in it. They haven't been involved in it. It's just that we as a people don't see it. So I would then ask, what has our involvement been thus far? Who have we been working with? Have we been working with the members of the EU? Have we been working with Germany? Have we been working with France? Of course, we are not publicly having good relations with Russia. What are their involvement in this?
Well, Russia wanted to ultimately work with the Assad regime
Yes.
To overthrow ISIS, which I look at that and say, that's great. That means fewer American soldiers have to be put in harm's way. It's interesting how the phrase "support the troops." We hear that all the time, but that seems to be the last thing on the minds of our leaders when it comes to foreign policy. If we're looking for solutions that involve putting people, taking American lives out of harm's way and allowing people over there to do it, people that actually are going to be there, because we can't be there forever. I mean,
No.
I suppose we could, but it's not something that we certain that the American public wants. And if our leaders are just going to drag us out, forever, this is really troublesome. And the fact that they won't actually give us straight answers during
Yes.
this election cycle is really problematic too. Every time I hear the phrase "they hate us for our freedom," it's just like nails on the chalkboard, because it's just a blatant form of deception.
So you have this idea of blowback, which is to deliberately withhold information from people. So you have that going on, coupled with the idea and the value of secrecy amongst bureaucrats and agencies. So they feel that secrecy is necessary for national security. So again, it becomes so complex. So you have all of these different acts, right? So that different agencies within the United States government that people follow. They're supposed to continue to keep this tradition alive to protect you and I, normal people. However, when it comes to individuals who create these policies, the people, ordinary citizens, deserve to understand what everyone is is doing.
Well, here's an interesting observation. Like you said, that they have all of these policies to keep us safe. It's been now 14 years since 9/11. We think of everything that's happened since then, the Iraq invasion and so forth. We've spent billions of dollars. We've had so many lives lost. I'm not even sure what the tally is. If we had done none of that, if we had done absolutely nothing, if there was no response to 9/11, I'm not suggesting that's what should have happened, but if there was no response at all, we would be safer than we are now. So everything that was done, most of it was just totally counterproductive and actually made us much less safe. When we look at what Iraq was before the invasion, there was no threat, no danger whatsoever from Saddam Hussein. He was a secular dictator. He had no extremist element of his regime. And the last thing he would have ever done would have been to attack the United States or Israel, because he knew what eventually would happen was that he'd be overthrown in no time at all. And it's really remarkable how you think about it. We overthrew that government in that sovereign nation. We overthrew it in a matter of weeks, and now we are 12 years later, and over 12 years later, and it's infinitely worse off. It's completely there is no government, and now we've had Mosul and Fallujah overtaken by ISIS, and they're knocking on the door of Baghdad. And the only thing that's keeping them from there, the Iraqi government just left. The people that we trained, that we gave all these expensive equipment. I mean, there's a grain of truth to what Trump was saying about the Humvees and how they left them there. The Iraqis, which outnumbered ISIS by like 5, I don't know what the fraction was, but they greatly outnumbered ISIS. They just fled. They just fled the region, and then now the only thing that's left that's keeping ISIS from spreading are also our enemies, and that's the Irani-backed Shia militia.
Yeah, it's our enemies, but also too, you made a great point, and I was going to converse about that.
Sure.
The fact that we have our troops there.
Yeah.
So we're keeping our troops there to say that, hey, our troops are helping the people, A. B, we owe the militants or the militaries within these nation states the ability to train their own forces. So we're there to monitor them, because we just can't leave, because if we automatically leave, chaos is going to happen again. So it's like we're babysitting.
Yes.
So we've created this culture of babysitting, which when I said earlier, my point earlier about us not really upfront showing that we had our hands or we're going to help Syria out, is because I think the United States is trying not to be the babysitter or of nation states. However, I still strongly believe that citizens, ordinary people, have to still ask the question, what is it that they're not saying? What is it that we don't know? Because within asking questions like that and critically thinking, we can be able ourselves to kind of, see what they're not telling us. Because if our troops are there to protect them, why can't they be here to protect us? Why isn't there, a program where the troops from there can come here? I mean, do we have to always go abroad?
Also, the fact that our troops are really not trained to be police, which is what they've been turned into. The military is meant
militarization of the world. Is it? Can we say that it's going on?
Well, the military is meant to destroy our enemies, our adversaries. It's not meant to be a police force. And so what we've seen is the military that's been over there for a very long time, and the people there resent it. They resent it. They resent us much more than they ever did before. And in fact, the very people right now that were previously no threat at all, that are the military force behind ISIS, that the military know-how, which is that's really the big difference between Bin Laden and Al Qaeda and the Taliban before 9/11 and after 9/11, is that they were there was a great deal of hatred towards the United States, and there were jihadis, but there was never an interest in forming what would be called a caliphate or a worldwide Islamic nation or state. Now that's what we have. That's what has that idea is what's proliferated. So, how do we get rid of it? It might be just by staying out of the way and letting other forces, handle it.
I think that's what the U.S. is trying to do because, at this point, their issues within the Middle East are historically deep. It's so what can the United States offer them besides more weapons, which we have seen regimes that we've backed have used weapons in their own interests, which some of their interests, I don't know what goes on behind closed doors with negotiations, could be the same interests of our own. But the thing is, when you're negotiating with another party, you and I can agree to something right now. Things change. Every day, something changes. We're constant. Change is constant. So, when you're dealing deals with the devil, you never know what you're going to get out of the outcome is going to be. And I want to say something too. The United States has to start making policies for our future interests. We usually, you see, we make policies instantaneously for us. So like right here, right now, this is what we want. There's this saying about the U.S. and policy. They say that it's a saying that goes that we don't have any real strategy. It's just like if you have a hammer and you see a nail, you just bam, 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 bam. So it's said that we tend to be very antsy with our policy. That there's no real logic to it.
There's also no real discussion of it, and that's
That could
what
be a
I
big
find
problem.
That's
Yeah.
what I find very troublesome. We have we have a political discourse that's ultimately based on punchlines, and it's based on sound bites, and it's not based on any serious discussion of what the ultimate effects are of what our government is doing. I have to be careful when I say what we're doing. We're not really doing it. It's what our leaders and our
So I
government
say
is doing.
ordinary people, then you have elite people.
You have elite people, and there's been many studies that have found that we have an oligarchy. And we look at, for example, I think everything's sort of interrelated. I know
Yes.
you've done research, I'm sure, on our healthcare system and on inequality and those things. And you look at how, for example, access to healthcare, which would benefit the vast majority of the population.
Yes.
We're talking there's so many people that are underinsured or uninsured before Obamacare, and how Medicaid expansion would really help the population a lot, but it's something that is just politically can't be passed. It doesn't matter if the population wants it. And that's why I say that we have a sort of an oligarchic system, because it's only the very powerful few whose interests are represented by our government. And it's sort of the job of politicians and the media to make us confused about everything else. And we look at the Middle East and you say, well, why would that be any different? Why would our foreign policy be any different than our domestic policy? We're looking after the interests of the elite. Those are the interests that ultimately drive policy. And I think that we're seeing that here. We look at the population of the military that goes over there and are putting their lives at stake. They're usually coming from backgrounds who have no political interest. And so when I say, the term support the troops is really just a soundbite. It's not something that actually drives, policy is not driven by interest in supporting the troops or keeping them out of harm's way. And so that would be, my remark if I was sitting there on the debate stage, for example. I would be saying that all the time. But nobody's really saying that. Bernie's talked about it a little bit when he said he's trying to say, well, why not get Saudi Arabia involved?
That's a really good point. I mean, and I think I would extend that, and I would pose the question, if I was a candidate, what does nationalism look like? We don't talk about nationalism enough in our country. I mean, even with the racial issues that have been happening for forever in America, besides the Black Lives Matter movement, every candidate was born in America. They understand what racism is. why should you have a movement to talk about that? Why haven't there been plans in place for all the candidates to talk about what nationalism truly is outlined? I mean, I don't know who's working, who's on their campaign team, but obviously they're not people who think about nationalism first.
Right.
Because if you think about nationalism first, you understand that, okay, of course America is great because we have this middle class, but we're also great because of the immigrant. Take Miami, for example.
Right.
You had Germans there, Italians there, Bahamians there, African Americans there. So many people were in Miami working. And that's the story of America. So why is it a problem?
We also don't even have a positive net immigration. We have zero net immigration. We have as many people coming in as there are coming out. So it's sort of a myth that we have this huge influx of immigrants and they're ruining the country and so forth. And really, that's something, Trump's bringing it up, but there's nothing new about that. That's been going on for some time. It's a scapegoat argument that's been used for years. The data just doesn't bear that out. And like you said, a lot of people come over that are very productive. So
Yes.
that's, and of course they do jobs that no one else wants to do and so forth. We just have about a minute left.
Okay.
You're doing some very important research right now in Miami-Dade. If you just want to give us a brief synopsis of that in the 30 seconds or so we have left.
Okay, so I'm currently working on a thesis, Democratic Narratives from African Americans Living in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I am evaluating 3 aspects. First is segregation, desegregation, and then lastly, immigration.
Well, that sounds great. It'd be interesting to see the results of your research there. We have about 10 seconds left. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I'll give a very special thanks to my guest, Mariah Williams. And we'll see you next week for the final episode of We Are the People, Students for Liberty. Please tune in for that. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Night.
You have been listening to We Are the People with social advocate Tracy Marks, who every week bring to the light the needs and changes in our current system. Tune in every Monday night at 7 p.m. on wearethepeople.tv and participate in the conversation in the chat room or call 888-565-1470. Tune in next Monday for more information and facts and stay aware of your surroundings and challenges at all times.